All right, now I've been bragging about you for 4 weeks. Well, I didn't know I could really brag on you the first week, you know. But after the first week, I knew. I've been bragging on you to everybody who would listen. Because you all are good. Turn to a neighbor and say, you're good. We've learned from week 1 that becoming great begins with our expectations. So repeat after me. How we do anything, is how we do everything. All right, you've got it. That's all there is. Not really. For 6 weeks, we've been talking about what it means and what it takes to be a great or greater church. I've been bragging to Larry, just about everyone else that I've come into contact with, about how well you've been learning these very things. We've been talking for 5 weeks in general about the 5 things that great churches do. So I'm going to see if you can tell me what they are. So I invite you to put your hand up. Great churches have worship. Sorry about that. Let's hold it. Put your hands down a minute. Erase that. We're going to do this right. Okay, hands up, everyone. Here we go. Great churches have awe-inspiring worship. Great churches have mountain-moving ministry. Great churches do intentional evangelism. Great churches have faith-filled fellowship. And great churches develop deliberate discipleship. All right, turn to a neighbor, give them a high five, and tell them, let's do all 5. Now, 6 weeks ago, we started by talking about the theme of great churches having awe-inspiring worship. Repeat that with me. Great churches have awe-inspiring worship. Now, worship is the basic act of God's people. It is how we love the Lord our God with all of our being. That's what we read about in Matthew 22. Then we talked about how the results of that act, the results of loving the Lord our God with all of our hearts, move us to mountain-moving ministry. Repeat that with me. Great churches have mountain-moving ministry. Now, ministry is our response among God's people to God's presence. Ministry is how we love our neighbor. And we talked about in the 3rd week how the first act of loving our neighbor, how the first act of ministry needs to be intentional evangelism. What kind of evangelism? Intentional. Right. Then we talked about how that event, now let me go back. Evangelism is the telling, if you remember, or the presenting of the gospel or the good news in such a way that it causes people to have to choose to decide to follow Jesus or not. And then we talked about how every day we wake up as Christians, we have to make that decision. Are we following Jesus today or are we not? And there is no sitting on the fence. We either follow or we don't. Evangelism shares the story. It provides a witness and an invitation to life in the faith-filled fellowship. Now, faith-filled fellowship is where we find out that it's not only that we believe, but we belong. It is where we find our strength, our support, our encouragement, our hope. As we did all of the meetings, the flock meetings, we finished the flock meetings yesterday with our last flock meeting, and I'm going to tell you, as those went on and on, I found out that First Christian Church of Duncanville, Texas, is absolutely, spectacularly a faith-filled fellowship. You want to know how I know? You want to know? Yeah. Oh, phew. I know because as I listened to the stories around those tables, I saw the tears, I heard the laughter and the joys. I felt the compassion and the empathy and the caring that was happening around the table. And if it was happening around the table, here's what I really know. It's happening around the sanctuary. And it's happening around the congregation in its broader circles. So after we talked about faith-filled fellowship, and we actually talked about what it took to have faith-filled fellowship. It takes time. Trust requires intentional moments and efforts. Now, last week I told you that I had told you that to set you up for the last finger of our exercise, and that is deliberate discipleship. Because when we have intentional moments and efforts, that's discipleship. Deliberate discipleship is, simply put, intentionally learning to follow Jesus Christ in a disciplined effort to discover and develop a life lived with and for Jesus Christ. And we talked about how discipleship happens. And I don't know if you remember, but we talked about how we become better disciples as disciples see and disciples do. Remember, disciples see and disciples do. All right. So, all of that has brought us to this point. After all of that, after 5 weeks, I have another question for you. Is anybody surprised? No. It is, I will tell you, the most important question. It is the question that's going to make all of the work that we did either worth everything or absolutely worthless. How many of you want it to be worth everything? How many of you want it to be worthless? You know, I never know what they're doing back there. They could be back there making faces at me. All of us in this room want the work that we're doing to make a difference for the future. So, who's ready for the question? Here it is. It's very theological. It's very hard. Here it comes. Are you ready for the question? You ready? So what? We spent 5 weeks learning what it takes to be a great church. So what? We've spent 5 weeks getting to know each other. So what? We've spent 5 weeks worshiping and doing some changes and hopefully making some differences, but so what? What does it matter? If all we do is know what it takes to build a great church. What does it matter if we only know that it takes awe-inspiring worship and mountain-moving ministry and intentional evangelism and faith-filled fellowship and deliberate discipleship to build a great church? Because there's a really important follow-up question. Does knowing equal doing? Let me ask again. Does knowing equal doing? No. Thank you. Now let me call your attention back to the scriptures that we've been reading. I know that you've all memorized Acts chapter 2, verses 42 through 47, right? I think John's ready to share. My friends, we need to remember what the scriptures tell us. And here's what I can tell you. In Matthew 22, Jesus is talking to the crowd and he gets asked a question. What's the most important commandment? And he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your being. This is the first and greatest commandment. And then he says, but that's not enough. See, and that's one of the problems. Most of us settle for the first answer. Most of us settle for the first bit. And we go, oh, isn't that nice? And isn't it nice? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your might. And we think about that. Oh, isn't that great? It's wonderful. Jesus says, no, it's not enough. You have to remember commandment number 2. It's almost as important as the first. Love your neighbor as... Oh, there's more. Uh-oh. You know, we were okay with love the Lord your God because, you know what? We can love the Lord. We can come together. We can sing. We can say, Jesus, we love you. We can do all kinds of things. And then Jesus says, love your neighbor. And we think to ourselves, Jesus, if you only knew my neighbor. Isn't it the truth? It might be the person sitting next to you, so don't raise your hand. Love your neighbor. Ooh. So how do we do that? Well, Jesus waits to give them the answer to that. He waits until the 28th chapter of Matthew to give us the answer. And he says, the way you love your neighbor is you go out and you make disciples in your world. And you baptize them and you teach them to obey everything that I've commanded you. Oh. I think we just like the idea of loving our neighbor better. It's true, isn't it? Love the Lord your God. Oh, we can do that. We can come to church and we can worship and we feel good. And, you know, we come up here and we even put up with the pastor making us raise our hands and counting things off and doing this and doing that. You know. And then he wants us to love our neighbor. Well, we can even turn that into a theory. Isn't it true? We can turn that into a theory. It's really good to love your neighbor, right? Except we want to choose our neighbors. Isn't it true? We want to pick our neighbors. Yep. I love you. I love you. And love you. And. Love you. Sometimes. It's true. We do it all the time. Even in the church, we do that. Now, I was told in all these flock meetings that we love everyone here. And quite frankly, this was about the most loving congregation I've ever been in a flock meeting with. Honest to God, it really is. But I also know that most of the people at the flock meetings were people. And whenever you bring people into the mix of the gospel and the church, you know, we still do some choosing. You know, in some places, if they don't look like us, smell like us, taste like us, feel like us, good news is we don't really think that way here, I don't think. At least you installed me today anyway. You didn't go, I was a little concerned. Knowing doesn't equal doing. So Jesus says, love the Lord your God. Worship. And he says, love your neighbor. Do ministry. And the things to do is to bring them into the kingdom. Do evangelism. Now, I know that there's a fundamental breakdown here. And the reason I know that is because there are empty seats beside you. Gerald said you called an evangelist in the first service. He didn't use that phrase. I was disappointed. I'll give you another try next week. I'm an evangelist. Everybody point at me. Go ahead, point at me and say, you're an evangelist.
You're an evangelist.
All right. Did I say put your hand down? Now, point it at yourself. Repeat after me. I'm an evangelist.
I'm an evangelist.
Because, my friends, one of the things that we've learned is that I can't do it all. I refuse to try. I will teach you. I will equip you. I will inspire you. I will encourage you. I will pray for you. I will enable you. I will not evangelize the people that God has put you in the midst to evangelize. I'm not going to steal your joy. I'm not going to steal God's joy for you. Because there's nothing like bringing someone into the kingdom of God. I know because I remember. I remember the day my father gave his life to Jesus Christ. My dad was what you would call, well, I can't say that word in church. You can fill in the blank. He was a hard, don't say it. Never went to church, but he always made sure us kids went. I never understood that. I think he knew that my mother would never cook another meal for him if he didn't agree. My dad never went to church. He had never darkened the church door except for people's funerals, and even that made him uncomfortable. I remember the first day he went, he came into the living room in a suit and tie. Now you have to understand, I've never seen my dad in a suit and tie except when he was headed to a funeral. I said, "Who died?" He went to church with us. It was very uncomfortable. 6 of us in the front seat of a Ford 1964 pickup. Yeah, it's kind of a weird picture. It was fun. He was really uncomfortable. I'm going to tell you. He went back the next week. And on the 3rd week, I'm sitting right here, just behind Emily. And Pastor Jack gives the invitation, and we're singing whatever song it was we were singing. I wish I could remember because we'd sing it every week. Because it was a song that I thought must have worked really well. And you could hear the congregation kind of get quiet as my father made his way forward to make his confession. He made his confession of faith. All of us kids were absolutely amazed. I thought my mother was going to fall out of the choir loft, off of the organ bench. The next week he was baptized, but what really transpired is as I left the church building that day, what I heard. Bernie Carper, one of the longtime elders in that church, was all smiles. He says, "David, this is one of the greatest days. One of the greatest days in this church's history." I looked at him like, "Me, son. Dad, that church people join the church all the time." He says, "No, you don't understand. We've been praying for your father since the day he and your mom got married." Folks, there are lots of people in this world like my father that day. And I guarantee you that it wasn't Jack that brought him, it wasn't the preacher. It was the prayers and the constant good conversations of people who loved my mom, who loved my dad, who loved me, who loved my brothers and sisters enough to not give up on a man who had never entered the church's doors for worship. Now, I've told you that story because I want you to understand why I'm an evangelist. And why I understand that every person in this room, even back here, are evangelists. Because the 5 things that great churches do change people's lives. But we have to do them together. It wasn't enough for people to know that they ought to be nice to my dad, that they ought to share the good news with my dad, that they ought to pray for my family. It only made a difference when they started doing all the things that needed to be done. I've set some goals for First Christian Church in Duncanville, Texas. If you've been at a flock meeting, you've been hearing about them. If you've been at the board meeting, you've been hearing about them. But if you haven't been, you're going to hear about it now. I've set a goal, and I've asked for permission. The board has said you can do it for this year. The flocks have said you can set some goals. We're going to create a vision that changes our world by the end of the year 2013. But in the process of getting there, we're going to do some things at First Christian Church. We're going to grow the church, this church, by 25% across the board. Now, what that looks like is 25% more people in worship, 25% more people in Sunday school, 25% more women at Disciples Women, 25% more youth, 25% more in the choir, 25% more everywhere. And before you say that I'm only concerned about numbers, please understand that my father was a number. And every person that we bring into the church, while they might be a number, they have a name. And Jesus is calling. So I'm not really just about the numbers, because every number is a person. And I'm not talking just about attendance, really. I'm talking about 25% more money given to the general fund, so we can give 25% more to mission. Larry, what do you think about that?
All for it.
I'm thinking 25% more in Bible study. Every group. Concerts that are standing room only because they are already pretty full. So what does that mean for you? Because remember, I told you you were an evangelist. Here's what it means. And I challenged the early service. I'm pretty sure you won't let the early service outdo you now, will you? You really won't, will you?
No.
Thank you, John. Here's the point. Take a look around. Think with me what would happen if each person here today brought one person into the church by the end of 2013. Just one. I'm not asking you to go bring out 7. I'm not asking you to bring one a month. I'm asking for you to bring one person into the church as a new member by the end of 2013. What does that do to the sanctuary? Say that a little louder. It fills it. What do you think that does to our offerings and general fund income? Goes up. What do you think it does to our community's vision and ministry? Goes up. We become more visible. We become known more broadly as the church where God things happen. My friends, great expectations are wonderful if there's a plan to meet them. Great expectations are fabulous and helpful if you are ready to step up and be more than what we have been before. So the question is, are you ready to be more than we've been before?
Yes.
Over here. Most of you have signed this. Last week, I think, was the first week that we got by a whole week without somebody else signing. If you haven't signed this, I'm asking you to commit to helping make this church a great church. Larry, we'd even invite you to sign over there because you're going to help us. You didn't know that, but you're going to help us. Go ahead. We can't do it by ourselves. It doesn't just happen. The results of the visioning and planning that we're going to be doing are going to be seen everywhere you go. And the results will go even farther. To make our church what God has called us to be is going to take each one of us and some people who aren't here yet. That's important. It's going to take, say it with me, awe-inspiring,
Worship.
mountain-moving,
Ministry.
intentional,
Evangelism.
faith-filled,
Fellowship.
and deliberate,
Discipleship.
all of us together. Amen.